Margolor's epilogue in Kirby's Return to Dreamland is setting out to finally tell the little alien's adventure after the events of the main campaign. For the longest time it was unclear what exactly happened with this dimension-altering traveler, and it's quite unusual for Nintendo, as well as Kirby, to specifically explore the story aspect of the franchise. Often, these narratives are hidden behind optional lore to not complicate the base game too much and keep everyone on the same page. So far, they did fairly well with this approach, but it seems like times have changed. We are not sure how elaborate or ambitious this new mode is going to turn out, yet it shows the potential and maybe even a glimpse into what we can expect in the future. Before Return to Dreamland Deluxe was announced, many players hoped to see a collection of the originals Return to Dreamland, Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot all together. Especially the two 3DS titles would benefit from the visual upgrade with a setup like that. Combining Star Allies into the mix, the Switch would turn out to be the ultimate home console to experience every modern two-dimensional Kirby entry. Instead, they decided to put extra care into one title instead of spreading it into three different ones, and now that Return to Dreamland Deluxe shows its aspiration contrary to coming across as a quick cash grab, it's much more understandable. Still, the option to someday receive similar remakes to one of the 3DS games is not vanished. They might not be the most successful entries in the series financially, just very good and on par with what to expect from the franchise, but the reputation is like no other title in the series. Planet Robobot especially is still regarded to be peak 2D Kirby and essentially perfected the modern concept. On top of that, neither of these titles make use of the 3DS specialities to an extent where it would be fairly difficult to translate these features into the Switch. They are simply outstanding Kirby titles, without any heavy gimmicks, and it would be a shame to miss out on an opportunity like that. The only problem arising would have been the reasoning behind such a deed. Doing another remake because of visuals is hard to justify regarding how the developers behind Kirby only have so many resources to create a game at the same time. Return to Dreamland Deluxe depicts the exception, since it's one of the biggest stepping stones in the franchise and a part of an anniversary. The reasoning, however, has changed with the conclusion of Margolor's epilogue, and now it's more probable than ever to expect a similar treatment for Triple Deluxe as well as Planet Robobot. First, let's examine why all of a sudden not only the probability but also potential skyrocketed into new horizons. Besides simple graphical upgrades, the Margolor epilogue showed the willingness to explore untold stories instead of simply adding something for the sake of it. In an alternative dimension, we received a rather straightforward new mode featuring Margolor, not too different from the regular game. It's more like a nice to have and plays out similarly to Star Allies Guest Star mode, where you can beat the game with any ally you like. The level design was in most parts identical with minor exceptions, and the only new feature was the addition of items boosting your stats. Nothing about the bosses changed, and the only surprise was a secret final boss. Overall, the Guest Star mode was just a way to replay the game in regular intervals, instead of offering a truly unique second experience. The other alternative is something like Meta Nightmare Ultra or DDD's Extra Adventure in Triple Deluxe. Again, slightly altered campaigns with some noticeable differences, but nothing to gush about. If at all, Margolor's epilogue is comparable to Heroes from Another Dimension, the final mode added to Star Allies. Bosses are changed, the level design is completely new, and the whole atmosphere is completely different from the base game. Margolor's epilogue goes one step further, includes the stat boosting feature with even more depth, and on top of that, tells an interesting narrative. This is something they could do for many Kirby games, but why is it that Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot in particular offer themselves greatly for such a treatment? Well, the answer is simple. The two main leading roles besides Kirby, Taranza and Susie. Despite the fact they are not the true antagonists of their respective games and only function as the main obstacle to reach said foe, they are still each game's prominent face. So prominent that they were both added to Star Allies as playable characters, just like Margolor. Furthermore, Taranza and Susie are quite underexplained. If you're not interested in the lore, and by playing Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot casually, you don't really understand their motivations. With Susie, it's a little more clear, but Taranza's whole backstory is at no point described in Triple Deluxe, and he just comes across as a shallow servant for the final boss. Fans, however, know that this is far from the truth, and one of the big criticisms Triple Deluxe received was how everything was dumped at the final, with Taranza not interacting interacting with Kirby throughout the game properly. The evidence that the creators internalized criticism is Planet Robobot itself, as Susie talks to Kirby on multiple occasions and feels like a true character participating in the events. Still, the casual player has no idea about her past and relationship to the final boss, which again can be changed in the future. By remaking Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot in a similar fashion to Return to Dreamland Deluxe, there would be finally the chance to add extra adventures like Margolor's epilogue and explore these characters more extensively. Let's start with the mischievous spider Taranza. I will not bore you with specific lore details, but in case you are not aware about his backstory, Taranza is not only the servant of Queen Sectonia, the bee-like final boss of Triple Deluxe, but also her past lover. Before Sectonia turned into the greedy insect, she resembled a similar creature to Taranza and strived for beauty. To fulfill her desire, Taranza sought out to find the dimension mirror, making Sectonia even more obsessed with her elegance and ultimately turning her into the power-hungry queen you know from the game. On some occasions there are even small Easter eggs in other games to see how Sectonia's original form looked like. It's true that Taranza helped at the end of Triple Deluxe to end this madness of beauty finally, but it left a never-healing scar in his heart. Star Allies portrays this desire to see her one final time a little more by giving him the ability to create an Sectonia illusion and stating how he's looking for his queen, proving that he still hopes to meet her one day again. All of this makes up for a more than solid premise to explore in a particular mode, and just as I mentioned, these snippets will be ignored by most casual players. They will simply beat Triple Deluxe, have fun with Taranza in the guest star mode, and that's it. Now we finally have the chance to bring light into this rather tragic character in the series by introducing Taranza's bonus adventure in a possible Triple Deluxe. Let's just say remake. First, just like Margolor, Taranza already has a playable build. It seems like Margolor is only slightly altered, but overall, it seems like he resembles his playable build from Star Allies nearly identically, and the same would go for a Triple Deluxe remake. The same goes for Susie, and this alone saves so much work already. Next, we have to decide what story they could actually tell. In case of a prequel, they could focus on the relationship of Taranza and Sectonia and the plotline of how she became devilish. Taranza would find out about the dimension mirror, but to add some spice and length to this adventure, the mirror is shattered, just like in the Amazing Mirror. I will go into the reason for that in a second, but Taranza would have to travel through various slightly altered levels from the original in order to find each piece and repair the dimension mirror. With this setting, there are two options they could build levels around, since the people of the sky, the little flower people you meet at the very end of Triple Deluxe, are just as underexplored as Taranza himself. It would be a great possibility to flesh them out a little more, but centering the course around the sky setting would be quite similar to the original. Instead, they could let Taranza either travel through the mirror world or some kind of dimension in between. In Margolor's epilogue, you can clearly see level design being reused from the regular adventure, mixed with the skin from another dimension and seasoned with some new sections. Imagine Taranza traveling through a modern rendition of the mirror world. It would make up for distinct and unique visuals. Naturally, you would also have to fight off new versions of existing bosses, but this makes no sense since this adventure would take place before Triple Deluxe, right? Well, it depends on how you portray it. By fighting off more powerful versions of Triple Deluxe bosses, Taranza would have met these creatures before, therefore knowing what they are and what they look like. After Kirby chases him through the skies, he would get reminded of his own adventure and create these bosses based on his experience from the mirror world. And since his magical capabilities can only carry so much, naturally these base bosses from the original Triple Deluxe can also replicate the power to some extent, creating a logical explanation why they are weaker and how Taranza is creating them in the first place. The reason why the dimension mirror is shattered in the first place could be up to imagination. Kirby still loves its lore, and maybe it was the people from the sky who shattered it because they know of its power. Imagine someone sealed a powerful creature into this mirror and destroyed it in order to prevent it from rampaging. This sealed beast could be the secret final boss of Taranza's adventure, but but if we want to go down the more easy route for the creators, just reuse Dark Taranza from Super Kirby Clash. By looking into the completed Dimension Mirror just like DDD's bonus strip in Triple Deluxe, an evil version of Taranza would emerge and portray another possible final boss. As I said, they could simply copy and paste the fight from Super Clash and add 1 or 2 more attacks to mix things up. The potential for a prequel is definitely there, but you can also easily spin it as an epilogue. After Sectonia was beaten and peace returned, Taranza desperately tries to find a way to bring his queen back. Because the Dimension Mirror started this whole debacle, it might be able to end it as well, so the goal would pretty much be the same, with the difference of interpreting the final boss in another way. Dark Taranza would emerge, showing the little spider that the very same could happen to him if he's too greedy with his wish, just like Sectonia. After defeating his evil counterpart, he realizes that you cannot bring back what is lost, and ultimately comes to terms that he will never see his beloved spider again. Just like with Margolor, it would conclude him as a character and eventually bring light to his unknown tragic tale. Everything I just described can also be applied to Susie, the #1 assistant and daughter of Haltman, boss of the Haltman Corporation. Despite the fact she has a deeper presence in the game, it's still not quite clear what actually happened before the events of Planet Robobot. After an incident where Haltman presumably lost his child, he made too much use of Stardream and slowly but surely lost his memories. When Susie returned as an adult, he no longer recognized her, but still feels a connection as he's still willing to hire her. Together they start to plunder planets and eventually arrive at Planet Pop, leading to the events of Planet Robobot. Being one of the most beloved Kirby titles to this date, most of you probably know about the ending, but everyone who isn't aware, Haltman dies during the events and Susie leaves Kirby's home planet, giving herself the mission to spread harmony across the universe with a specific scientific knowledge. Apparently, in the English post-screen description of Star Allies, it states how she continues the Haltman Corporation and still invades planets, or is planning to do so. But this seems to be a misguided translation from Japanese. Whatever the case may be, what would be Susie's adventure, since there's no real character arc for her left? Just like with Margolor, they could show what happened after Planet Robobot as Susie's visit different planets to collect data. It might be a translation error, but I enjoy the idea of her continuing the company, but using it only for science instead of conquering. In Margolor's epilogue, the special gimmick is the feature of leveling up the little alien, and with Susie's case, you would collect items and maybe scan the environments Metroid style. Story-wise, her campaign wouldn't be too interesting, but the gameplay would be heavily resource-centered and focused around the idea of collecting. Think of the Great Cave Escape or other exploration-based Kirby titles. In Star Allies, Susie can upgrade her blaster with elemental powers, but since this is Planet Robobot, I have a much different idea of what kind of purpose these collected resources would serve. Although we have seen the cunning servant fly away with a fully functioning robot suit, when the epilogue starts, Susie gets into trouble, damaging not only her blaster but robosuits during the events as well. By gathering these resources, you can work on the robot suit, repairing it to old glory and giving it individual stuff by adding parts that are simply for cosmetics. In addition, you can also upgrade your blaster and add set elemental powers from Star Allies. This gameplay loop will basically center around collecting items, exploring new areas and juggling the decision if you want to upgrade the suit or your blaster. The only question remains is what kind of tension would this mode have? Since you visit different planets and most bosses of Planet Robobot were direct copies of Dreamland's inhabitants, they would have to reuse bosses from other titles. Super Clash has a catalog of potential candidates, but since this campaign wouldn't focus on action or narrative, it would be excusable to not focus on that part too much. However, the final should obviously deliver to some extent. And what about making up for the mistake the original Planet Robobot shamefully did? After traveling through galaxies, Susie would finally arrive at the place of the incident where she presumably lost her life, creating a bittersweet scene where she remembers her once sane father. Then the surroundings start to crumble and a mechanical beast appears, the heavy lobster from Kirby's Superstar. There's no specific reason for this classic foe to turn up, but even though Kirby Planet Robobot is a mechanical focused title and mainly uses already known characters as bosses, it was such a missed opportunity to not bring the heavy lobster into a modern title back. Now, with this mod, it would finally be the chance to make up for that mistake, give the robotic crab the appearance it was waiting for so long. Regular players would simply see a cool looking enemy in front of them, but fans would understand the irony behind this moment, as it would be a nod from the developers basically recovering the unfortunate expectations we had when the original released. Besides, by this point, you would finally fully powered up your robot armor suit, making this a spectacular clash between two mechanical giant beasts. The sheer feeling of this fight and Heavy Lobster's amazing track Remixed would make up for the lacking story, but this doesn't mean it cannot end on a high note. After destroying Heavy Lobster, Susie uses its resources and leftovers not for her own suit, but builds an entirely different one for a present. Some time passes and at a drowsy morning, Kirby wakes up by the crash of what seems to be a meteor. Leaving his little house in shock, he steps outside, waits for the dust to disappear, only to see his robot armor suit he lost during the final of Planet Robobot at last again. As you can see, the desire for a triple deluxe and Planet Robobot remake shifted from wanting them because of visual reasons, but actual real gameplay potential. If we want to theorize even more deeply, maybe Star Allies playable characters were all preparations to use their playable builds someday for a greater purpose, or at least some of them. You could do the very same for Adeline and Ribbon in a potential Kirby 64 remake, but we should not overplay our hand. If Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe proves itself to be a remarkable financial success, the odds for similar remakes of the 3DS titles might not be too low. But what do you think about these potential setups? What would you like to see from a potential Taranza and Susie mode, and make my ideas any sense? All of this may be the start of something greater, and since we know the creators love these characters just as much as we do, one day we might see their perspectives in reality.